Well, welcome back. I'm going to be speaking about the difference between attraction and retention in relationships. But what I would love to do is to connect today's topic with what I discussed in the previous session, where I talked about the good woman, and I identified a number of qualities that a woman who is considered a good woman has, but more importantly, what separated her from any other woman. Let me make the links so you can understand and you can see the building blocks of what I am hoping to put across to you. Men and women are not the same. We're different in every respect. We play a different function, and therefore the means of satisfying what I call the avatar of a man is slightly different to the means of satisfying a woman who wears the avatar of a lady. On the average, men, and when I talk about men, I'm talking about men from 18 years and above. We want three things. Now, this is irrespective of where you find us or where you meet us. All men generally above 18 find themselves in one of two groups or places. I call those marketplaces, dating or relationships. Irrespective of which and where you find the man, on the average, in the general, men want three simple things: sex, servitude, and serenity. If you meet a man primarily in the dating marketplace, sex is usually the most important part of that sequence of three S's. If you meet a man who is looking for something more substantial and looking for a relationship, then it requires less of a dependency on sex, and he wants something else. For men who've been married and who've been together or cohabiting, you find actually that it moves even further from just sex, and it's a blend of the other two, servitude and serenity. Now, that was the first message I gave a while back, and in yesterday's session I said a good woman is one who separates herself from the average woman. The average woman being someone who can provide the three S's. But a good woman is, in many ways, leagues above what the average woman is. I made reference to the fact of the qualities that she has and what she provides and brings into a man's life, but recognizing that what made her unique was, when I talk about men in the dating or the relationship marketplace, we are narrowing down a man's need to intimacy, or someone providing an intimate relationship. A good woman, on the other hand, is one who has relationships that are not only erotic or eros, the love called eros. You're talking about phileo, you're talking about relationship with the father, relationship with the brother, relationship with friends, relationship with lovers. And what you tend to find is that the qualities they have allow them to be a blessing to a man, irrespective of whether that man is her father, a brother, a lover, or a friend. I like to put another building block on the two conversations by discussing retention and attraction. Generally speaking, most men transition from the dating marketplace to the relationship marketplace. Some people move very fast through the process. Some people stay longer in the first before they transition to the second. But also, these days, most people go through cycles. You start off in the dating marketplace as a single person. You meet someone you fall in love with. Both of you begin a relationship. You get married. For some reason, it doesn't work. Both of you become single, and you find yourself back in the dating marketplace. It's almost like a cyclical experience for some. For some other people, they are lucky. They exit the dating marketplace and they remain out for the rest of their lives. Now, this is a session perhaps targeted to women, but I think guys could glean some ideas from this as well. I have found, and my observation has been, that there seems to be a challenge for a lot of women who are sophisticated, educated, intelligent, sophisticated, and who live in the modern West. There seems to be a challenge in being able to successfully transition from the dating marketplace to the relationship marketplace, for whatever reason. And that, you might say, obstacle plagues them for a period that is much longer than it should. And that is what I want to talk about. Attraction is something that happens very easily. A woman's primary agency is her beauty. Beauty, youth, attractiveness, fertility, purity. Now with that, men will find you attractive. As a matter of fact, for most men, our standards are so low when it comes to sex that we will have sex with people who perhaps do not meet our attractive standards from the perspective of someone we would be in a relationship with. But because we have a need, a desire, we will have sexual relations, short-term sexual relations, with people who are not as attractive. Now, remember I said in a few sessions that a woman's sexual marketplace value, her attractiveness, beauty, plays a huge part in whether she is selected as a potential mate by a man. So, men, generally speaking, will have sex with any and everything, all things remaining equal. But most men would only settle for certain specific groups, types of women, for a long-term relationship. Women, on the other hand, play a slightly different approach. A woman's standard is maintained at a high level, irrespective of whether she's dealing with someone she would marry or someone she's just having sex with. Now, for example, if you were to ask most men, what is your ideal woman? Now, he might say a woman that is known, so that you can assign a ranking to the woman, but he might talk about a woman who has a ranking of about 8 in beauty, a 9 or a 10. That is what we want, most men on the average. That is what we would love to have as partners, wives, lovers. And if you said to the same man, what if you just wanted to have sex, just for one night? The same man would also say, or most men would say, I would like to have sex with someone who is an 8, a 9, or 10. Someone who is attractive, beautiful, very pretty, potentially someone who is gorgeous. And when something happens that is very interesting, partly you tend to see this is how the porn industry and the OnlyFans industry has developed. The same man goes into a bar and he sees a woman who's a 9 and he makes an attempt and she shoots him down. and he drops his standard. As time passes by that evening, assume he starts at 9, at 11, he would happily settle for someone who's a 6. At 1 in the morning, it's getting late, the clubs, the bars are about to shut. He would drop his standards down to a 4. As a matter of fact, if no one will see him or see him with the said woman, he would drop his standards down to a 3 or a 2, simply because of his need for sex. Women, on the other hand, might say, if you ask them, that they would like a man who is an 8, a 9 or a 10 in attractiveness for long-term relationships, but they would also tell you that their preference would be a man who is an 8, 9 or a 10 for a short-term hookup. If pushed, women tend to stand their grounds in terms of their taste preferences. So the same woman goes to a bar, assuming she's single, and wants to have sex. She doesn't find a man who is an 8, a 9 or a 10 at 9, and she will wait. At 11, she might drop from a 9 or a 10 down to an 8 and say, do you know what, I could settle for an 8. At 1, she might settle for a 7. Seldom would she fall below a 6. If she can't find someone who she finds attractive, most women will simply say, let's call it a night. Now, there's an interesting aspect to what's taking place. This simply means that for most men, you might say our standards are quite low with regards to sex. And for most women, the standards are quite high. So you have this divergence between men and women in terms of intersexual dynamics. Now, you might be thinking, what does this have what does this have to do with retention and attraction? In the dating marketplace, which is where most people meet themselves as single people or as unmarried people, I have found amongst the women who are intelligent, educated, successful, attractive, they struggle to transition from the dating marketplace to the relationship marketplace for a number of reasons. Most women believe, without realizing this early enough, that their value remains the same irrespective of the introduction of time into the equation. So a woman who is perhaps an 8 in beauty at age 22 has access to so many men, so many options, so many inquiries, so many suitors, and she turns down, and rightly so, about 95% of those people. At age 27, she still believes that her sexual marketplace value is still let's assume, an 8. It's maintained the same position. At 32, if she's still unmarried, she still believes that she is the same woman, and therefore she is still an 8, and she's making demands that she made at age 22 and 27, despite being almost 10 years older than she was at 22. Now, something interesting happens. She might still be able to attract the same quality of men. This is where it gets slightly misguided. She believes that her ability to attract the man is a direct reflection of, number one, her standards and her beauty and her attractiveness, which, technically speaking, is correct. However, I go back to the conversation I made about men and what we will choose for sex. A man might see you as a 22-year-old woman and say, she's an 8. I could see myself having a long-term relationship or being married to her, and I will be willing to pay the highest price for that experience. The same woman at 32, most men realize that, well, me, the man, I can afford more because my value on the economic front has risen. At 22, I didn't have much, so I would have been willing to do whatever would have been necessary to have her as a wife. At 32, the man thinks, well, I can afford much more, and therefore I can attract a woman who is 32 years, but also a woman who is 10 years younger. The woman, on the other hand, assumes that the man wants her for long-term relationships, or for a long-term relationship, without realizing that most men, generally speaking, will judge based on what they will tolerate for sex before we consider what we would accept for dating long-term. Now, the dilemma here is as follows. Most women do not have any difficulty with regards to attracting men, but they confuse the ability to attract a man with the skill set required to retain and keep a man. You've heard me say before that a woman is with the man that she's able to attract with her beauty. A man is with the caliber of woman that he's able to retain with his wealth, with his resources, or with his, you might say, economic value. So two separate games. Now what this simply means is, in order for a woman to understand the pathway to transitioning from dating to relationships, she has to know what men want. And more importantly, she has to know which men are able to give her what she wants. And perhaps this is the most important part of the process. She has to understand how to split the difference. She has to understand how to split the difference. In other words, she needs to be good at negotiating and understanding when to take some of the chips off the table and know when to concede. The women who are unable to negotiate are the ones who usually lose in the long term, because men have you might say, the benefit of time, that we can draw out and we can extend and we can prolong the transition from dating to relationships into our 40s, which is when we start to get to the position of earning a lot more, coming into our manhood, having failed, having the self-confidence and self-esteem to take on the responsibility of being a husband, being a father, being responsible. The ability to prolong that decision-making process means that the balance of power is usually on the man's side, the older he gets, and less so on the woman's side. She might be attractive, you as the woman might be attractive, but time is not on your side. Nature, unfortunately, starts to do things that might seem unfair, that might seem as though it's a double standard, and things that perhaps, if you were the creator, you may have done things differently. But nature has a window, and women, generally speaking, have to get some of the decisions that are necessary for their long-term happiness, get those decisions made as early as possible without trying to be greedy. An important statement that I should re-emphasize. Without trying to be greedy. The concept of having everything and having it all is one of the reasons why most women exit the relationship marketplace with nothing to show for it. As you approach 30, your priorities should change. Your strategy should change. Your expectations should evolve. You should remain hopeful, but you should be realistic. And you should transition very quickly from your ability to attract a man to your ability and skill sets required and the attitude required to retain and keep a man and keep him happy whilst you remain fulfilled. Those who cannot do that are the ones who normally fail in relationships. And the reason for that is because from about 30 years, the door starts to shut. Geriatric pregnancy begins at 35, at the end of 35. So from 36, women go into high risk pregnancy. One of the requirements that men have, and one of the reasons why men go into and will decide to get married, often has to do with starting a family. So a man who is, say, 40 or 35 and who is dating a woman who is 30 is going to be judging the woman under from two different lenses. The first is her sexual marketplace value, which has to do with her attractiveness. Her attractiveness, her beauty. The second, assuming this particular man has intentions of being a father, would be on her reproductive fertility value. In other words, her ability to reproduce safely without risks. At 30, the risk is high, but not as high as the risk at 35. At 40, the risk is much higher than it would have been at 30. So most men will factor this into the picture. But more importantly, if the man in question has intentions of being a father, he is also thinking about the qualities that you should have as a woman, so that as you transition and as you pick up different functions and roles, first of all, you are an individual, perhaps a professional, then you become a wife, then potentially you become a mother. What he is trying to do is make a predictive guess as to whether you have the qualities to be a good mother, to be a good wife, to be someone he would want to spend the rest of his life with. And therefore, he starts to judge you, in addition to your sexual marketplace value and your reproductive fertility value, he starts to judge on your non-sexual marketplace values, such as whether you're hardworking, whether you have the traditional values and the traditional upbringing, which requires servanthood, your ability to cater to the needs of those who depend on you. So he's looking at things such as your mannerisms, your behavior, ethics, principles, attitude, your upbringing, chastity, modesty, and even more importantly, whether you are easily coachable and teachable. Because now he's bringing you into his vision for the future and his vision for his family. And he's probably bothered and concerned about whether he has a helpmeet in you, a team player, a partner for life who will get on board his program. So you start to see almost a blending of different expectations from men. Beauty matters, but beauty is not everything. If you're beautiful and you cannot reproduce, but he wants to have a family and he's eager to have a family, then at some point you might find that the same beauty that attracted him is unable to retain him. So women have to learn when to start picking up the skill sets, the attitude, and when to start expressing those skill sets and attitudes in a relationship in order for them to be considered for the retention role. Now, I should say something also. Generally speaking, the attributes, physical or otherwise, that attract men to you come in two parts. Those that are incidental to who you are. In other words, you did nothing to have those. The color of your eyes, assuming they are natural, your height to waist ratio, maybe your natural hair color, the texture, the shape of your face, assuming no enhancements, your skeletal frame. All of these things are things you were gifted. You were gifted at birth. There's nothing you've done to earn or to deserve such gifts. That's one aspect. The second aspect is things that you have worked hard to acquire or to maintain. This could be your weight, your height to weight ratio, or your weight ratio adjusted for your height, said in a different way. This also has to do with how fit you are in terms of not just physical aesthetics, but also in terms of your stamina. For example, if a man expects you to be a mother of 2 or 3, then he expects, and he might not expect this, but generally speaking, he expects that you have the stamina to wait and care for and love and provide and nurture 2 or 3 kids, sometimes including him. That requires a lot of stamina from women. So the stamina that comes to do with doing physical activities, but the stamina that comes from the mental stamina, the emotional stamina, having a reservoir inside you that you can draw from. A lot of women do not have this, which is why most women go into post-depression once they've conceived, because they have the well is empty, there's nothing to draw from. So men are making sure that the attributes you have that were gifted to you and the attributes you have acquired are of a level that guarantees or that ensures, there are no guarantees, but that ensures that in the long run, his decisions or his bet on you is a safe one. Women therefore have to understand that as you move from your 20s to your 30s, sadly you start to lose some of the attributes that are gifted to you, like beauty. We all start to age. I'm not as attractive as I was when I was much younger for several reasons. Just gravity takes its toll. Gravity does what it does. In many ways, every day that goes by, I'm dying. I'm not as young as I used to be. We all go through that process. However, as you transition into 30 and potentially into motherhood, it's important to understand that at 30, all things remaining equal, if you were raised in a family where your mother taught you how to be a woman, taught you how to serve, taught you how to relate with men, there are attitudes and skills that you will have. If on the other hand you were raised in a family where you never saw that modeled, you never saw your mother serve a man, serve your brothers, serve the community, you never saw the interaction between a man and a woman through the various stages of life, you might struggle. And that means that prior to 30, you have a duty to learn all those skills, develop the attitude, develop the inner fortitude and willpower, which you will need in order to ensure that you have the retention capability as you move from the dating marketplace into the relationship marketplace. Now, those who cannot and who refuse to move from one to the other are the ones who usually fail. So what tends to happen is the honeymoon phase of a relationship at the early stage typically lasts about 3 months, probably 90 days to about 120 days. And what you tend to find is as a woman approaches 30, that honeymoon phase starts to shrink. And what you see is women circling back into new relationships. They start at 30, they get to 4 months into the relationship. Because they do not have the skills, the attitude, the temperament, the resilience, the stamina for retention, they come back into the marketplace. Now there are 31. Perhaps this time around it goes for another 3 months. A lot of heartbreaks in between, a lot of trial and error. But this time around the honeymoon is for 60 days and they're back again in the marketplace. And what you're seeing here is the inability to transition from one stage of life to another because of a lack of knowledge, an absence of understanding, and unfortunately a void position with regards to wisdom. Now, one of my favorite books says that that a house, in other words a family, a union, is founded not necessarily on love alone. By wisdom a house is built. Through understanding, the rooms are filled with beautiful, you might say, treasures and things. And with knowledge, you're able to sustain the relationship going forward. And what we're seeing here is wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. 3 critical ingredients that are needed to ensure that you can transition from one to the other. Now, of the 3 of them, the one thing that you should attempt to have is understanding. Wisdom, we may never attain wisdom. Knowledge is based on information, what you know. Understanding comes from your ability to comprehend the said information. Wisdom is simply the application of the said understood knowledge in the right way at the right time to get the outcomes you want. We may never get to wisdom, but understanding is important, because with understanding you can understand when the needs of a man changes and what his needs should be. Now, you've heard me say this before. It's quite easy to understand men. There are needs we have that we're born with. There are needs that we have that are seasonal, and there are needs that we cultivate. Understanding allows you to comprehend what season of life the man finds himself in and what season he might be going into. And as a helpmeet, as a woman, anticipating what that need could be in advance of the necessity to provide that need and supplying that need at the right time, but also supplying that need in good faith without being exhausted and actually without feeling that you're giving too much of yourself. That understanding is what creates the retention bonus. It creates the opportunity whereby men then move away from sex and they move into servanthood and silence. Understanding that serenity and silence are connected together at the hip. And what men primarily are looking for, especially as they move into relationships, is serenity. Serenity with your presence, with your words, with your countenance, with your disposition, serenity, with the tone of your voice. And then servanthood. And servanthood does not mean being in the kitchen every single time. It doesn't mean cooking. It doesn't mean cleaning. At the core, it means, can you serve your purpose into my purpose so that we are unified in our outlook and in our goals? If you cannot serve a man, and perhaps I should use a business analogy to reduce the emotive feelings that women might have as they hear this. A CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, serves the CEO. The CEO is the Chief Executive Officer. You have a CFO, Chief Financial Officer. You have a COO, Chief Operating Officer. The COO and the CFO serve the CEO. But guess what? The CEO serves the vision of the company. So in a family, the woman serves or submits to the father or to the man, and the man submits to the vision of the whole institution of their marriage or their union. If you are unable to transition, if sex is all you bring to the table, if sex is all you focus on, there will always be someone better than you, more attractive than you, and his lust for those people will go through cycles. However, sex, beauty, attractiveness can attract a man. It takes a lot more to retain a man. I discussed those qualities in the previous session. What it takes, what makes a woman a good woman. But I'll leave you with the following two statements as I close. Servanthood and serenity need to be studied by women so that they can understand how influential they are as women in a man's world. I hope that's been useful.